Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Watching Mental Health. And I'm so excited because today we not only have a new great guest, but we also have a new platform that we're working off of. And so this is going to be a good change for Watching Mental Health as we continue to grow. And with that, I want to introduce our guest. I want to jump right into this. Chaplain Sy Alli is a site success manager and minister to several personal care ministry care homes in Monterey, California. And he works with at-risk youths. Now, Sy has led many different lives, from being in the military to working as a wrestler and a dignitary protection agent before then going on to become a chaplain. And as a suicide attempt survivor and having battled with life-threatening PTSD, he wrote the book Out of the Storm. And this book is for all those lost souls who are out at sea and battling their own situations with depression and PTSD. And today on Watching Mental Health, we are talking about depression and suicide, mental health and spirituality, and what it's like to battle the mental health storm so many of us face alone. With that, welcome to the show, Chaplain Sy.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and being willing to share your story and to talk about these really hard conversations. And I know that it's a struggle out there for a lot of people, not only who are experiencing them, but to talk about them. And so I think it's important to have these conversations. And so with that, before we get into any of it, I just want to ask you a little bit about yourself. So tell me about what brought you to the show and really, what brought you to this line of work.
It's interesting how I fell in this line of work because for so many years, I traveled globally as an executive and dignitary protection agent. So I was around a lot of high net worth individuals, a lot of recognition, diplomats and dignitaries that I traveled with globally. But finding this space where I am at now I think it came at a price. It came to a price where I was within a hair trigger finger of being pulling the trigger of my Glock 19 and really blowing my face off. I've struggled mightily, Katie, with PTSD. And there's a lot of folks ask me to describe the difference between just depression and PTSD. Well, PTSD is really what it says. It's post-traumatic. So something that happens that's traumatic in one's life can bring about PTSD, where depression can manifest itself through different origins or different realms, so to speak. So once I was able to get through this and once I got back reacquainted with the Veterans Administration, it came, they diagnosed and it was PTSD. And I knew it was because there was three things that happened within maybe a 10-year time span. My father passed away in 2005. My father-in-law passed away in 2009, and I got divorced in 2014. And that
Wow.
trilogy was enough to really push me over the edge. So I was able to come through that spiritually. Now, not a lot of people who are able to walk away from suicides, Katie, can attribute anything spiritual. I mean, God, I'm
Um,
convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that God thought that I had more to offer and he was able to step in on my behalf. That doesn't necessarily happen with a lot of people. It could just be by happenstance that you're able to walk away from that. But even those, and talking and, speaking with other veterans that battle this, you don't know what your calling is. If you're able to walk away from that, not everybody does, Katie. Unfortunately,
right.
God does not save everybody. And that's a whole nother conversation because I'm unfamiliar with his ways and how he operates, but I know he was able to come for me. And I'm grateful as a result. And I've been able to build this platform on mental health, particularly, Katie, for those who suffer in silence. That's the scary aspect of when people talk about it and they're like, oh, I'm going to take my life. That's a person we can take and say, hey, listen, let's talk. It's the person like me operating as if nothing is going on in my life. And I'm actually struggling at some of the lowest depths that could be possible. So I want to make sure that I'm able to build this platform to help others who don't want to speak up, Katie. And I think that's so important today.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple things that you mentioned there that I find really interesting. One was that your these traumatic events that happened in your life didn't all happen at one time. And I think people assume that, oh, oh well, their loved one died 5 years ago, so they're fine, right? Or they've moved past that. Not knowing that, another loved one dying or another just, another sort of grief, right?
Right.
Divorce is
Yes,
grief,
it
and
is.
another sort of loss can hit and can really add on to that, even if it's years apart, right? People just don't realize that until they're in it. And I find that that really is interesting that you brought it up like that.
You know what, Katie? I didn't know how to process grief. Now I do. I've
Yeah.
gone through seminary training and I've been able to help others, particularly cancer patients. For 3 years, I worked at a cancer treatment facility up in Puyallup, Washington, outside of Tacoma in Seattle. And I was able to walk with cancer patients and walk with their family up until the time of their passing. And I just tried to make sure that I could work with them on the grief process. And, we psychiatrists and psychologists and ministers go through grief training, and we know there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, but
Hmm.
not everybody crosses those thresholds. Some people might just struggle at depression and not able to walk themselves through. So I think it's important for folks that are struggling with grief be able to get in touch with a minister, a grief counselor, whatever that person could be, to help you walk through that. I wasn't able to process it. I came up in a generation where I was told that, as a little boy, you don't cry. When I got spankings or, when I got disciplined, I was told, hey, don't you shed a tear. So I was
Yeah.
internalized that. I said, okay, I'm a man. When I lost loved ones in my life or family and friends, I've tried not to cry at funerals. I tried to hold it in,
Mm.
and that's the
Wow.
worst thing you can do because all that does, that grief just festers inside of you, and that forms depression. That can form a multitude of things, Katie. So I'm able to look at that differently now, but back then, I was not able to process grief, and all it just followed me. It followed me from my dad's death. It followed me from my father-in-law's death and went right through, my separation and divorce. I was able to operate professionally, but then when I got home, Katie, it's when everything just hit me. I looked in the mirror and I truly did not recognize who I was. I couldn't figure out that figure or that image that was looking back at me. That's how bad off I was. So I do believe it's important to know or be able to help people process grief. I see it all the time when folks on social media are posting things and they really want, they want some sort of counseling. They want to get with somebody to just say. So a lot of times I'll secretly message a person and say, hey, look, do you want to talk? Come, let's talk, but I'm not going to try to counsel you on social media. This is something that we have to have a conversation on FaceTime or Zoom or whatever we're doing and to help people to
Right.
process grief. That's a tough thing, Katie.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Grief is such a tough thing to process. And it's something that we all experience at one time or another in life. And for some of us earlier and for some of us later. And it's so funny because it just seems like we all experience it and yet the world just keeps going without really being that comforting space that we need. And so it is important when you are experiencing grief to reach out for help because nobody talks about how to move through it. And you're right, it can fester and it can lead to significant mental health problems for years. For years, it can lead to problems. So it's really important.
I believe it's so important, Katie. And I try to help people. If I knew now if I knew then what I know now, it would be a totally different story. But I wasn't able to come to grips with that. And I was too afraid to be able to share my grief. Because when I wrote the book, I mean, I exposed all of my vulnerabilities, all of my trials and tribulations. I mean, I just wiped the slate clean and said, hey, look, I was vulnerable. I was vulnerable because I wasn't willing to talk to anybody. And those are the people, Katie, that really scare me the most. It's those who suffer in silence because it's hard to get to those people. And so I hope with the book, I hope with my platform and being able to speak that I'm able to at least, if I can help one or two people, Katie, I mean, I'm not a best-selling author. I don't know if this book will ever get to that level. And I don't, at first, I really was worried about that. But now I'm like, hey, look, if this can touch a handful of people, or if somebody reads the book and
Mhm.
say, hey, I'm okay, but so and so might want to read this, it might be beneficial to them, then I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's just a small platform. I'm a small cog in this big wheel of life. But if I can help somebody, I'm certainly going to reach out and help.
I agree. I agree. I think, I'm a small platform too, but every voice counts and every person that we touch counts, right?
Yes,
Like, even if your book only reaches 5 people and helps 5 people, those are 5 people that were helped. That's a big deal. And
absolutely.
so it's so cool. We need voices like yours. And I think that we really need voices like yours when it comes to spirituality. So let's talk about that a little bit, about mental health and spirituality. And tell me first, is it were you always a spiritual person, or is this something that really came about through your healing journey?
I was around spiritual people, but I don't necessarily consider myself as having been spiritual. I went to church a lot. My former wife, whose father was a Presbyterian minister, my father-in-law. Oh, so I went to church a lot, Katie, but I don't know if
Mm,
I was really accepting of God like I
mm,
should have been. It came to me later on in life, and it really. I had ministers in my family. So, my aunt was a African Methodist Episcopal. I went to Catholic school for a few years. So I went to Catholic church. I grew up as a Catholic, and then turned
mm,
Christian once I got into the military. But I never really considered myself spiritual. It was so when I tried to take my life in 2015, when I walked out of my office, I didn't think I was healed, but the only thing that I knew is that I would never, ever attempt to take my life again. I was still battling
wow.
depression. I was still drinking. It wasn't until 2020, actually March 1st, that I got a DUI and I knew I had too much to drink and should have never been behind the wheel. But it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I told my friends that night because I got arrested, I got handcuffed, put in an orange suit, but I got bailed out within a couple of hours. And I told my friends that night, told them, Katie, I said, I'm never drinking again. And I'm sure they thought that was hilarious because I was the quintessential life of the party. I don't think I was an
Mm,
angry or mean drunk, but I was the life of the
mm,
party when got sauced up. And I said that night, March 1st, 2020, that's it. And they kind of nodded their heads, but truly, that was it. And along with that, I picked up my mom's Bible and I started reading. And it just seems like something had come over me. I kept reading and I kept
mm,
reading. And then, like a week into my sobriety, I was absolutely approached by God, who assured me of what happened 5 years ago in my office was not a figment of my imagination because I couldn't analyze what had happened in my office. I was able to walk out. But God assured me that was Him that did that. And I need to start writing like right now. He says, "Write about that." He was like, and I'm like, "God, if I do that, I'm gonna be people are gonna say, oh, he was weak, he was gonna take his life." But God said, "Look, you write, I'll handle the rest." So I wrote the book, and I've gotten responses from folks all over the world because the book is written in multiple languages. And then people tell me, Katie, you were it's I thought you were writing about me. So my story
mm,
resonates with others. They can understand the trials and tribulations, the vulnerability of being in a very, very dark place. So I knew I was on to something. I wrote an article first and put it on social media. And that's when I started getting quiet feedback for people telling me, hey, I'm battling too. Can you talk to me? Can you tell me what's going on? And I was able to do that. And then right along, once I started reading the Bible, I decided I wanted to go to the seminary. And I found an online because I didn't have money. I wasn't able to actually go into a full fledged, because if I did, I would have gone into a full fledged to go there. not just, study remotely, but actually go there. But my funds can only pick up the cost of these online courses that I was taking. And I took a chaplaincy course. And about midway through that course, it went through the grief process. And that's when everything came to fruition about how I wasn't able to handle it and how you should handle it. There's no real recipe, Katie, for grief counseling. You can say the 5 steps, but people don't necessarily go by, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. They can skip a step or go back. They can regress. So there's no
Sure.
real formula other than being there for somebody, just listening. One of the biggest things about my chaplaincy course was teaching me how to be a good listener. And I always
Mm.
thought I was a good listener, but I don't know if I was a great listener. And I've become an even better listener by just letting people talk, let their emotions flow. And then when they're ready for me to jump in, then I jump in. But if not, I'll let them talk and get whatever it is off their chest. So a lot of things had happened in 2020. And I ended up getting my certification to be a chaplain. And then one of my friends who I was living with, she was an oncologist at one of the bigger cancer treatment clinics up in the Pacific Northwest. She was like, "We don't have a chaplain. Why don't you just come and, try to cut your teeth on this?" So I started right after the pandemic and the quarantine stopped. I was able to go into the treatment facility and go into the chemo rooms. And that's when I started building these relationships with cancer patients and being able to walk that walk with them. It's hard, Katie, because I started with so many cancer patients and was down to one, and one gentleman went into remission, but I lost my last one who I was working with remotely just a couple of years ago and working with her family and able to see her grow spiritually in the last months of her life was reason enough for me to know that God had placed me where he wanted me. And then that's how my spiritual, career, my spiritual chops kind of grew as I went along. Because God was just like, you just keep going. I'll provide you. I'll show you who needs help. I'll let them come to you. You'll know the people who need help. And my goodness,
Wow.
he has done that multiple times, brought people into my view that I was able to help.
Oh my gosh. That sounds so hard to walk that with people who with cancer patients who are dying.
It was tough.
But they need it. They need someone. And so it's
I
wow.
applaud
That is some
chaplains who
tough.
work, in emergency rooms and hospices, in law enforcement. But, you have to be so spiritually strong to be able to help people. And you could still show that emotion. I mean, when I lost my last
Mm,
cancer patient, I was devastated because I had grew
yeah.
a relationship with her and her family. So she trusted me to be her pastor, remotely. And it was hard saying goodbye to her. Her last couple of days, she wasn't able to talk. And her daughter said, "Mom can't talk, but she can certainly hear you and she can see you." So as I was talking to her, I could just see it in her eyes, the joy of watching a person who thought that cancer was given, by God to people he didn't like. That's what she had been told. She had been told in church, you get cancer because you're not being a good Christian or you're not loyal to God. I think that's
Mm,
so
God.
hard and so mean spirited for people to say. I was able to walk her through, and she was ministering to her own family. So God's glory really worked. And then I transitioned and I'm working with kids now. So I
Mhm.
think I still work at nursing homes and I still work with people that are in the last stages of their life, but I also work in school districts and I work with kids. So there's a good balance for me now. I'm not just
Yeah.
dealing with death. I'm dealing with young lives that are coming up and the ability, even though I'm called a coach in school, I'm ministering as well as mentoring. I just don't want to
Mhm.
cross those lines between church and state and schools. But kids need that as
Sure.
well, Katie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's important that you mentioned balance, right? You can't just do the hard work and not do anything else.
Right.
Like we all need
Yeah,
something, right? And
absolutely.
um So true. But I find it really interesting what you were saying, about around your journey. And you were around religion your whole life in many ways. And it seems like it really didn't impact you until you were ready for it. I'm not going to say impact, but
Well,
you
you're
know what
right.
I
That's
mean?
a good
Like, it
word.
you didn't take it until you were ready for
Yes.
it. And I think that's true for so many people, but I also think that so many people struggle because they go into a traditional church setting and, like that woman experienced, are told very sometimes cruel things
Yes.
that I don't think God would say, right?
Right.
But so it's hard. So for anyone who's out there who is struggling with their spirituality and their mental health, and what would you say to them if they're not really sure right now because of what they've been told and or how they're feeling, in these difficult times that they're experiencing?
For adults, I like to put there's 4 categories. There is spiritual fitness, there is mental fitness, there's physical fitness, and there's financial fitness. Obviously, those
Mm.
that fourth one I wouldn't apply when I'm talking with younger people because they're not worried about finances yet. But for adults, these are 4 important things. And a lot of people are
Yeah.
surprised that I put finances in there, but it really is applicable. Our
Oh,
finances mean
it's a big
a
deal.
lot. I was homeless, so I know what it's like to be without finances.
Yeah.
So I think,
Yeah.
for me, I started on the physical fitness first. I looked at pictures of myself when I was director of corporate security for Dixie Brands, which was a cannabis manufacturer. They made edibles, and I was working in Denver. I looked like just a shell of myself. I had lost weight. My suit jackets were just, very big on me. So after my suicide attempt, I started going back into the gym. Now, if I had it to do over
Mm.
again, I probably would have done the spiritual aspect of that first and then done emotional and then done physical. But I started with physical and then I got into spiritual fitness. I got into emotional fitness and then I got into financial fitness. So, because when I got divorced, my credit scores were down into the low fours and high threes. So that was part of my, being depressed and thinking, man, I'm never, ever going to be financially, solvent or financially independent again. And so I had to work at that. And I thought that was part of this whole package. Now, for young kids, we can just talk about physical, mental, and spiritual if they have a spiritual family. But I don't push that on kids, not knowing what their family background is. But kids come up to me and tell me that they believe in God, so then I can have those quiet conversations with them. But for the most part, you need those 4, and without those 4, I think you're going to struggle with something. Again, like I said, a lot of people were surprised at financial, but I think that is, and you were nodding your head in agreement. That is very important. It's very important for us
Oh,
in
yeah.
our,
I've been there
yeah,
too. I haven't been
yeah,
homeless, but I have had some severe mental health challenges from difficult financial situations that I felt I couldn't claw myself out of. So it
it
hits,
was.
when you're worried all the time about that, it's hard. And so I think you're right. You need kind of that balance again and, in your life because one area can really rock you if you're not stable in that area.
Absolutely. So those really are my 4 pillars to gaining some emotional freedoms and being able, because I felt like I had these anchors on me, Katie, for so many years
Yeah.
and paying, alimony, and just the numbers were just through the roof. And I said, I'm never going to make it through this. But I've been able to. I've been more studious on my finances. The book is not making me a millionaire. Trust me, I'm not nowhere near. But, my job and the book, I'm able to better manage myself financially. Spiritually, I think I'm still growing. And when I'm in these schools and I'm around these kids, the first thing these kids do, Katie, when they size me up and they're like, well, he looks old, but he's got muscles. Wonder how old he is. These kids come up to me and say, Coach Sy, how old? They can't believe I'm 65. So working
Wow.
around young people has really kept me youthful. And you got to be on your toes because these kids they are smart, Katie. They weren't like a knucklehead when I was growing up and in school. These kids are very intuitive and they can pick up on things. So that's when I first started as a coach, they put me in an elementary school in Salinas, California, and the coaches knew that I was a minister. So if they were struggling with a student, they would give, the student to me and I'd pull him aside and talk to him. So within my first 2 weeks at this school, Mission Park Elementary in Salinas, California, I found out why one of the kindergartners was bullying the rest of the class. So I pulled him aside and I sat him down. I'm like, "Hey, what's going on? You're pushing these kids around." And he opened up, Katie. This kid was in kindergarten. He told me he lost his father about a month before school started. And he thought he was at fault. He thought it was his fault that his dad died. And he took that blame on his little 5 or 6 year old self, and it was beating him up in school. So I worked with him. Then he went home and he told his mom, Coach Sy really worked with me and understood. So the mom came back to school the next day and I got called to the principal's office. I thought I was in trouble. Coach Sy,
Right.
can you come to the principal's office? And I go up and this kid's mom is there. She said, "Are you Coach Sy?" I almost didn't say yeah. I said, "Yeah, yes, I am." And she was like, "Whatever you're saying to Solomon, please, please continue to do it." She was like, "I haven't
Oh,
seen him this way since his father passed." So she's like, so she asked me, was I a minister? And she took a good guess. And I said, "Yes, I am, but I have to be very careful." The principal's there. She's watching us. I said, "I have to be very careful." She was like, "You can talk to God whenever you want to Solomon." And when the parent left, the principal looked at me. She was like, "You know what? I got 3 school counselors and you've been here 2 weeks and you found out backstories on like 3 or 4 of my students." She was like, "I'm
mm.
happy to have you here. You go do what you need to do to help these kids." And that's how things just started taking off with me working with young people. And they do, Katie. They keep me young because again, they're on, I had a middle school student come up to me and she was like, "Coach Sy, can I ask you a really serious question?" I said, "Yeah, what is it?" She said, "Why are people your age so stupid?" I looked at her and I was like, "Why would you say that?" She was like, "Because everybody's mad at each other. They're mean to each other on TV." She was like, "What is going on with people your age?" And I said, "Kiddo, it's not necessarily people my age, but yeah," I said, "as adults, I'm going to apologize for you on behalf of these adults that you think are, are stupid." She's like, not you, but people your age." So,
Yeah.
she was able to pick up on this and kids are watching what's going on in our society and they're they're not processing this well. They are not feeling
Mhm.
adults in our society now. So I'm privy to a lot of that, Katie. They come up to me and they'll ask anything.
That's so true, and it brings up such a good point is, our youth mental health, it's in crisis right now. We have a different epidemic going on, and that's the problems of children in youth mental health crisis or experiencing youth mental health challenges that really they're not getting the support for, that no one knows what's going on. Suicide rates are through the roof. So talk to me a little bit more about that because you work in this area and you know suicide personally. Is this something that you've seen and what are your thoughts around us working through this crisis, frankly, as a society?
I think this all started once the pandemic hit. And then these kids were shuttered, Katie, not being able to go to school, not being able to
Sure.
have these relationships with their friends or with the teachers. So it's kind of gone like in a cycle where I don't know if the kids have necessarily gotten past that, but I do believe our society as a whole is making it even worse on these kids because and they're trying to figure out who they can look up to. You can look at celebrities and musicians, but I do believe it starts at home. It starts in the school. It starts in gym class or wherever that we have to be mindful that these kids are absorbing everything they see. And you know how social media is now.
Mhm.
It's available at the click of a mouse button or on your phone. So they see all this stuff and news is like in your face. You can't run or hide from the news. So
Yeah.
I try to do my best to assure them, like, look, there are good people that understand we want what's best for you. We want you to grow up and become productive citizens. We don't want you to grow up. And I'm out here in California, so there's gang activities in some of my school districts. I know it's there, so I try to make
Hmm.
sure, even when I'm around the parents, like, look, you've heard that term. It takes a village. I mean, I know it's overused, but it really does. It starts from the parents,
Yeah.
the grandmother, grandfather, aunts, uncles, the teachers, the principals, the Elevo employees like myself who are coaches and partners with school district. It takes all of us to be able to help these young people because the things they had access to now, Katie, I can't imagine me as a kid and growing up in the 60s and 70s and seeing the things and having the news available like right at your fingertips. So I think it's important for kids to see adults in a better light and not just, I'm trying to promote my book, but I really do care about these kids. I wouldn't be working in these school districts if I didn't care about these kids. And I tell our coaches, look, if you're here for just a paycheck, you might be in a wrong, you can go work at In-N-Out Burger and make 22, 23 an hour. If that's what you're looking at, just the money. But if you're looking at being impactful in these kids' lives, this is the place to be. So I have to tell our coaches that and our instructors that as well, and the kids know, Katie, they know if you're coming at them with a line of crap. They know it and they can sift it. And we
Hmm.
got coaches that are problematic. These kids are like sharks. They're like circling around. You're hearing the jaws thing as they're circling
Oh
around to
yeah.
come in, to go after these adults that are in their classroom. So it's very important. And I think mental health needs to be addressed. It was taboo, back when I was growing up. People just whispered, oh, Uncle so and so, might is going through some things, but nobody really talked about mental health then. Now you see
Hmm.
Simone Biles, you see Michael Phelps. I can't remember the tennis player who openly talked about their mental health issues. I think the younger
Hmm.
generation that's coming up now is able to talk about it, and I did a book signing in a middle school in Salinas, and the kids, they were intrigued. And then they were able to, in turn, open up to me about how they view life or what they see. So I do believe it's important to be able to openly communicate, even if they're kids. If I can do that with a kindergarten kid and come to find out he lost his dad and he's struggling with the grief, then I think
Yeah.
anything is a possibility with young people.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And it's right. You need to give them that opportunity, that space, that safe space to so they feel open, so they have that village and it is so essential to your mental health, to our youth mental health to have a village. You mentioned you did a book signing in a middle school. So tell me more about your book. It's a book for lost souls. Can kids read it as well?
Yes.
Talk to me about it.
I
Yeah.
wrote it because it's only like 170 pages, and I there was an effort to make that as short as possible. It's not my full-blown autobiography, it's more of a memoir. I take folks back into my professional wrestling days, my military days, my protection days, just to show where, how I came about this. But yes,
Yeah.
and I asked the principals of my school districts, I was like, "What do you think?" After they read it, and it was mostly the middle school principals that said, "Yes, I believe my students are, mature enough." They're like, "There's going to be some kids laughing or whatever, but that's they're going to be a small minority in the group." So when for career day for El Sasal Middle School in Salinas, they invited me to come out and talk to several classes and just talk about the book and me being an author. And when I talked about this and I asked, I'm like, it's nothing's really graphic. They're like, kids need to
Wow.
hear this. Like, don't hold back. These kids need to hear this. You could speak life into them. And so when I did it, the kids were, I could see their eyes when I talked about the suicide. I could see some of them looking a little, upset. But after, and I told them, okay, how many of you read? And nobody raised their hands. Nobody raised their hands. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, so I'm not going to give you a copy of the book. And then they all raised their hands saying, hey, yeah, we read. So I personally signed like several copies of the book for kids. As I asked the principal, are they okay to handle this? He was like, yeah, go do it. and
So
don't hold back
you
on me.
bring up you bring up such an interesting point, and I think that I want to make a point to say this because a lot of people feel like we should shelter our children from what's happening or not talk about mental health challenges because we don't want to give them that idea. And frankly, I've been taught, in the suicide prevention and awareness courses that I went in thinking I don't want to bring up the word suicide to somebody who I think is suicidal, but I was taught bring it up. Ask them directly. You say the word. You give them that chance because otherwise they may not say it. And kids are so intuitive and they need to be told that, yeah, like bad things in this world are happening and it's okay to have these bad feelings, but you need to work through them and we need to give real world examples for them to understand that. So I just think it's so powerful that you're having that's a real world example with your book and what your middle school teachers have told you.
It is, and because I didn't know, I was hesitant to do it until I talked with the administrative staff of this particular middle school, and they were like, "Oh, definitely," because I shared it with them first, and they all read it, and they were like, "Wow,
Of
this is
course.
powerful." They'll,
Right.
'cause there's no cursing in this. There's nothing. I mean, again, I get graphic when I talk about how I set up, what was my mindset going into my office that day and how I was going to do this, moving my kids' pictures from behind and making sure the blood splatter didn't get on my kids' pictures. Those were the type of things that I thought about more. You know, I should have been thinking about how my family's going to feel when I take my life and who's going to be
Of
left
course.
behind. But I wasn't thinking about that. And a lot of people aren't thinking about that. And I know now that was really selfish on my part, Katie, knowing that I had kids and my mom was still alive, knowing how people would have been affected by my death. And I didn't think about them. So now I do.
Yeah.
And I try to talk to people. It's like, hey, look, if you got family, you got friends, you need to reassess this. Because when I was homeless and living in the veterans homeless shelter, I had a ready-made audience and I had other veterans that had worse PTSD. Like one of my housemates was an Army Ranger and had several tours to Iraq and Afghanistan and saw death on a daily basis. So when you see that much death on a daily basis, you become numb to it and you come
Yeah.
home and then that's you're still numb and you're not able to talk to people. So I learned a lot from being homeless. I thought that was the end of the line for me, but that was actually God putting me in a position to say, hey, you're a chaplain, right? Go chaplain to these vets. They need you. That's why you're here. You're not here
Yeah.
because I'm punishing you. You're here because you need to be able to get to as many people as you can. I know that now. I didn't know it when I first went into this homeless shelter, but there's people that out
Mm.
were struggling way worse than me. So it's
Yeah.
it's essential to be able to get to everyone, even talking with senior citizens who are battling depression. So I've run the gambit. I've gone, dealt with a kindergartner and I've dealt with, 70, 80-year-old senior citizens who are depressed because they know they're going to die and they're not prepared for it. They never really got spiritually prepared for it. So part of that is
Right.
me helping them get spiritually propelled as best as I can.
Yeah. And really it just seems like you're a safe space to have these difficult conversations, whether it's a kid or anybody who maybe is in a suicidal crisis and isn't, thinking, "Oh, how is this going to impact my family?" because they're just thinking, "Well, it'll just be better if I'm gone," right? And you're like, "No, well, let's provide you a space to talk through this, to rethink this a little bit." And it's the same thing with these other, people that you're talking about, these other groups. It's the same thing with elderly citizens. It's providing them that space to grieve their end of their life in many ways. And so it's such a powerful thing that to be able to offer that space for people. And it's like you're not coming in as an MD, you're not coming in as a therapist, you're coming in as a real person with real lived experience and applying, of course, you've been trained, with ministry. But I just think it's such a powerful approach because to me, anyone who goes through these struggles can come out the other side and then help another person, right? Reach back and help that next person up a little bit.
It's funny. you brought it up. So before I came to California, I went back to my hometown of Pittsburgh, PA, and we were going to film a documentary based on my life, but I didn't have the funding and it fell through. But I also got a chance to be a youth mentor at a high school just right outside of Pittsburgh, Penn Hills, PA. And it was, I remember the movie, The Breakfast Club. It
Yeah.
was just like that. On a Saturday morning,
Cool.
we go in and these kids are miserable, Katie. They got their their pods on, they got their hoods on, and it's me and another instructor, another youth mentor. We're sitting there in our little community circle, and none of the kids are saying anything. So the other instructor, who's like a lifelong friend, told me, she was like, "Sy, you really should tell the kids about your journey." And I was a little hesitant at first. But then I thought, well, let me do it. And I broke it all down to him, Katie. And within 15 to 20 minutes of me talking to them, the hoods came off, the AirPods came
Mhm.
out, and they were ready to engage. And this young lady who just sent me a note not too long ago I think she was a junior, maybe a sophomore in school. She rolls up her sleeves and shows me the cut marks on her arm where she was
Wow.
self-harming herself. And
Yeah.
that's when it hit me that young people have a lot of issues. And my daughter said it sarcastically to me. She was like, "Well, Dad, you know, young people have mental health issues too." She said it sarcastically, as my daughter would tell me. But it resonated. And so I corresponded with these kids. And she says, the young lady who was cutting her arm said, "Well, what helped you?" And I said, "Writing." She was like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, writing was and will continue to be my therapy." And after I had left and moved to California, the other instructor, Tawana Gatewood, who I wrote in the book, she was like, "Sy, you would be so proud of Cassandra." She got up in front of the class and told about her journey. And it was so emotional, and the kids were crying. She was like, "I really wish you were there," because she said, Coach Sy got me motivated to do this. And she sent me a nice note last week about, being inspirational. And I'm like, "Kiddo, I'm paying it forward. Now you pay it forward. You wrote your story. You talked to people about it. Now you help other people. That's how this works." And I think she's going to be great as being a spokesperson about mental health. If I ever did anything and had a traveling troupe of speakers, she would be one of them, because I think young people can definitely identify with what's going on with her and what's going on with a lot of these other young people.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. That gives me chills. And you're right. Young people can be peers for other young
Yes,
people and can be that peer support, and it's such a big deal. So okay, so we're wrapping up towards the end of the show. I have just a couple more
sure.
questions. The first is, for anybody who's tuning in and who wants to maybe listen or read your book, how can they read it? Where is it available? Can they get it on Amazon, or do you have a website?
All the above. You can get it on Amazon. You could order it through Barnes and Nobles. Yes, my website is www.fit, but it's spelled PHIT, and that's for prophecy, honor, integrity, and transformation. So fitsquad.com, you can buy the book right off the website. I've got several blogs in which I talk about mental health. Everything is on that website, but the book is also available as an ebook. It's available as an audiobook. It's available in Spanish, French, Italian, and Mandarin. So I tried to cover a
Wow.
few different languages, and I'm pleasantly surprised that the multiple language books are moving very well. I'm seeing things from sales from China for Mandarin, seeing a lot of sales for Spanish. So it's available in multiple languages. You can pretty much this is the cover, this is what it looks like. You see the lighthouse, which is indicative. A lighthouse, I wanted it on my cover because a lighthouse was, back in the day, it was used to guide ships that were out at sea back to shore.
Mm,
So I thought the
yeah.
lighthouse was very indicative to what my ministry and what my mental health platform is now, trying to get folks out of the storm, because I know I suffered in my storm, but I was grateful to be able to get pulled out. And I think there is a responsibility for me now to be able to help other folks get out of their own collective personal storms.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to end it on this. I like to ask all of my guests this. For those who are in the storm, right? And I think I know where you're going to go with this, but I want to ask it anyways. Do you think that a mental health challenge is something that you can overcome, or something that you should accept as something that you always have to work on in your life?
I think that's a combination of both of what you said. I do believe you can overcome it. I've certainly
Mhm.
overcome my grief, my depression, but it's something that is always back there. So I don't think you should lose sight of that. I think that's a most it's an inspiration, or it's a motivating factor for me to know, hey, it's back there. It's not coming forward. I'm not going to let it come forward, but I acknowledge, yeah, I was there. I'm much better today. I don't have any sort of dips, in my personality or my structure of how I'm built mentally. But yeah, it's there. It's there. And I don't want it to completely go away, because without that, I wouldn't acknowledge that I had it in the first place. So it's there.
Right,
It's there, but
right.
you can absolutely overcome it. But you have to be willing, Katie, to speak out and speak up. If I was exhausted from
Yes.
hiding it from everybody, I really wish somebody would have come to me and said, "Are you really struggling?" I don't know, Katie, if I would have lied or not, but it would have gotten me to be maybe a little bit more upfront about it. But nobody ever asked me. Everybody was like, "We were totally surprised. You look like you love life. You were the life of the party." But sometimes, the facade
Yeah.
is there, but what's lingering behind that
And
is brutal.
it it's so often the case. And you said it at the beginning too. It's, that's those people suffering in silence. And we always think, "Oh, they were so happy. Oh, they didn't say anything." And it's there, which is why it's always important to ask, "No, really, like how are
Yes,
you?" Like not just, "Hey, how's it going?" "Oh, it's fine." Like, "No, really, like how are you?" I want to know, and to be willing to listen,
yes,
right? To be a good listener, which
absolutely.
I think sometimes we struggle with as a people.
Absolutely,
So,
for sure, Katie.
well, thank you so much for your time today. This was such a fabulous conversation. I think we touched on so many really important, real conversations and topics that people are struggling with. And I just appreciate you coming on the show and for shining your light here with us on Watching Mental Health.
Thanks, Katie, so much. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And we are changing up a little bit as far as our publications, but look out every Wednesday. We will have new episodes. And so you can follow me along at katierosewechter.com, and that's where you're going to see today's episode. And with that, have a great day, everyone, and we will see you next time.